I see a man with strong features and long dark hair standing outside a small mud dwelling in a wide desert land, holding a small baby with care in his arms. A woman with a calm and expectant look stands close to him. Her hands rested gently on her round belly, as if she is waiting for a safe tomorrow. A saddled horse stands nearby under the clear sky, as if it has seen many long miles on dusty trails. The land around them looks empty and far from any town, with nothing but wind, sun, and memories. The scene feels like old frontier days where people learned to survive with whatever they had, where hope could be found in the middle of silence, and where every choice carried weight. The story begins on a lonely stretch of old American desert land, where the wind carried secrets instead of greetings. Travelers who passed through said the ground there remembered everything, even the feet of those who once walked and were never seen again. Dry tracks crossed like old scars, and every morning started the same way, the pale sun rising over a world that felt too wide for the people who lived in it. Some lived there by choice, others because they had nowhere else left to go. Folks from nearby ranch towns whispered about the Apache families who stayed deep in the land, saying they were guarded and quiet, living by their own rules. Many never saw their homes, yet the stories spread anyway. Among those stories, one name floated more than any other. They spoke of a quiet Apache man who stayed far from the towns and avoided riders. He lived with his infant child in a small shelter made from earth, wood, and sweat. Some said he built it on ground sacred to his parents. Others said he only stayed there because he feared the world beyond it. They claimed he never once asked anyone for help, not until one day when everything changed. What they never said, though, was why his voice trembled that morning, or what brought him to lower his head for the first time a few miles. From his land lived a young woman who worked as a helper in a ranched cabin once used by traveling cattle riders. She was not a child and not yet a settled woman, just old enough to carry her own hopes and strong enough to hold her own decisions. People called her soft-spoken but steady. She worked with animals, cleaned stalls, and tended to hurt dogs or goats when ranch hands dropped them aside. Some folks said she cared for small things because no one ever cared for her. She did not argue. She only looked toward the hills each sunset, wishing she knew why she felt drawn to something out there. Her life had been shaped by loss early on. She never spoke about it much, but anyone who saw her for more than a day could tell she understood the kind of loneliness that was not loud, not sharp, but deep. The kind that makes a young woman watch the horizon as if someone left their goodbye hidden in it. No one expected her to do anything special with her life, but her heart was gentle like river water, and sometimes the quiet ones carry stories that matter long after the loud ones are gone. She first saw the Apache man when he rode past the ranch path at dawn. His horse was not fast, but sure-footed. He carried a blanket close to his chest, and she thought it must be something precious. She noticed his face looked tired, not angry. Many feared his people just because their ways were different, but when she saw his eyes, she saw no threat. She saw a man trying to keep something safe. She watched from behind a stable post, wondering why he traveled alone in such silence. He did not even look toward her. It was as if his mind was heavy with something he was afraid to speak. No one at the ranch cared where he was headed. They said if he ran into trouble, it was none of their concern. The young woman did not agree, but she learned long ago that some hearts close like old barn doors and rust too thick to open. Later that evening, she sat near a forgotten fence post, holding a stray puppy she had rescued. As the last light faded, she wondered again where the man had gone and why his blanket seemed so still, like it held life that barely moved. The next morning, she went down to the creek to wash a rag she used for animals. She heard footsteps, slow, unsteady, almost ready to fall. She turned and saw him standing there with the same blanket. Only this time, she saw the small, round face inside it. A baby lay quiet, cheeks pale, breath too weak, wrapped tight to stay warm. The Apache man did not walk with the proud steps people expected from his tribe. His shoulders were low. His hands shook. His lips tried to form words that seemed to hurt him more than the sun that burned his back. He swallowed hard like a man choosing between pride and love. He stood only a few steps away, yet silence stretched between them like a line neither dared to cross. She could see the dust on his boots and the worry in his eyes. He looked like a man who fought storms alone until he finally reached one he could not win. Then he spoke, voice dry and shaky, while looking at the child instead of her. "Can you help the baby just once?" That was all he said. Not another word. Not a demand. Not an order. A plea shaped from desperation. Her heart pulled toward the child without thinking. She moved close and carefully placed her hands under the infant. The moment she took the baby, the small head rested against her chest, and she felt a faint breath brush her shirt. Something inside her cracked open like old earth touched by rare rain. She hugged the baby with both arms as if the child belonged there since the first moment it entered the world. The Apache man let go slowly, hands still hovering in fear that something might happen if he moved too quick. She whispered words she did not plan, telling the child that it was safe. She felt a fragile bond form between three souls who had never met before that day. He watched her face, searching for any sign of doubt. He did not know if he made a mistake by coming. He did not know if she would send him away or judge him like others. The young woman did not ask questions. She only held the child closer, feeling its weak breath against her skin, while a strange warmth grew in her chest. She had no training, no tools, and no grand promise, yet her arms became the safest place that baby had known in a long time. The Apache man blinked back tears he refused to let fall, not because he lacked feeling, but because life had taught him that tears never brought change. She looked up at him, wanting to ask what happened and why he was alone with an infant out on such rough land, but she waited. His expression carried many locked stories, and she did not want to break any of them too early. The wind slowed, and the desert grew quiet, as if waiting for the next moment with them. She knew deep inside that nothing about this was simple, and whatever happened next would tie her life to theirs in ways she did not yet understand. The child breathed softly against her shoulder. The Apache man stood still with fear mixed with hope, and she felt the weight of a choice that could turn her world into something she never expected. Before she could speak again, a distant sound echoed across the land, not coming from the wind or the birds. It was something else, something that made the Apache man lift his head fast with unease in his eyes and forced her to hold the baby even tighter than before. The sound that drifted over the empty land carried a warning neither of them could ignore. It was faint at first, like something brushing across the sand, but then it sharpened into a steady thump that did not belong to nature. The Apache man stepped slightly in front of her, though he was unarmed except for a small knife tied to his belt. His eyes moved across the open desert, searching for movement, and she felt her breath tighten. She held the baby against her shoulder and stepped back, toward a group of rocks near the creek. Even without words, she understood that danger could rise without a single cloud forming in the sky. The strange noise faded the same way it had come, leaving the silence heavier than it was before. She looked at him with questions, but he stayed quiet. His voice had already been used for something that cost him more strength than she could measure. The baby shifted weakly in her arms, and she focused on its soft cheeks and slow breathing. For a moment she tried to convince herself that whatever they heard was only a distant wagon wheel or a wandering horse. But deep inside, she felt the same uneasiness he did, when the wind blew again. He lifted a hand toward the small dwelling out on the far sand plain. A small mud home that looked like it belonged to a life built with heavy heart and lonely hands. She understood he wanted her to follow him there, so she walked slowly, holding the infant close, feeling its tiny heartbeat against her chest. The Apache man walked near her side but a few steps ahead, as if he wanted to make sure there were no threats near the trail as they came near his shelter. She saw that it was not large enough for comfort. It was made of earth, old wood, and dried grass that filled small cracks to keep out cold wind. Near the door lay a small clay bowl and a piece of cloth that looked like it was washed many times until it lost its color. She noticed the horse waiting quietly, as if it knew they were returning from something serious. The Apache man stood near the door and gave her space to enter first. His respect was silent, but clear. Inside, she found a small space with little more than a blanket spread on the floor, a piece of dried meat at one corner, and a small pot near a pile of thin wood. In a small pouch close to the blanket, she saw a few roots and herbs. She understood he was trying to treat the child using what he knew from his people. He pointed to a place where she could sit and brought a small container of water that he must have carried from the creek earlier. The baby's face rested against her shoulder. She slowly shifted it into her lap, trying not to wake it. His voice finally broke the silence. "The child has not taken food since night." His words were heavy with worry. She asked softly if the mother was nearby. She could see the answer in his eyes before he spoke. His jaw tightened, and he looked down as if the ground held the truth he didn't want to speak. She passed when sun rose last. She was strong, but sky took her to fast. His voice cracked. He turned his face away slightly. The young woman felt her heart sink and her arms tighten around the child. She wanted to ask what took the mother, but something inside told her the details were not needed yet. Grief did not need full explanation to be felt. She noticed a small piece of cloth tucked beside the blanket, likely belonging to the mother. She gently brushed the baby's cheek, hoping it would respond with a sign of strength. But the child only made a faint sound and stayed still. She asked if there was any healer near his people who could help. He lowered his head and answered with pain. "We are far now. They moved camp. I stayed behind for her to rest." But she fell with fever. She did not want child to move until stronger. His voice stopped, as if the memories were too heavy to continue. She could see he blamed himself, even if he did everything he could. She took a deep, slow breath and tried to steady her thoughts. She knew the ranch she worked at held medicines, though not many, and some of the women there had helped weak calves and newborn animals with simple mixtures. Maybe something there might give the baby a chance. But she also knew bringing an Apache child there would cause questions, fear, rumors, maybe trouble she could never fix. She thought of the ranch owner who believed every story told at the saloon, and the ranch hands who always carried suspicion like a loaded gun. She turned to him and asked what he wanted her to do. His answer did not come right away. He stared at the baby, then at her arms, and his voice shook again. "I do not ask for more than one moment. If child can live even one more day, then I know I did not fail. If you choose no, I take him and go." His eyes never turned away from hers. Outside, the sun rose higher, making the mud walls glow like baked clay. She looked at the baby again and felt something inside her rising like a slow but steady flame. She could not explain it, but the child felt like it belonged in her arms, not out in a world that refused mercy. She reached for the small pot near the firewood and asked if he had warmed water earlier. He nodded, surprised that she was moving with purpose, and began preparing the wood pieces. She could tell he did not know if she would stay or leave, but he watched every movement like he was memorizing her choices. Soon the fire started with a soft glow. She dipped the cloth in warm water and gently touched the baby's lips. The Apache man watched with both fear and hope, the kind that lives in fathers who have already lost too much. The baby's lips moved slightly, and a small sound escaped. It was not strong, but it was enough to show there was still life trying to hold on. She told him she needed to stay a while, and watched the baby through the afternoon. He nodded, and for the first time, his shoulders relaxed slightly. But he warned her with quiet worry, "If men from town or riders from ranch see you here, they will talk. They will say what they want, and truth will not matter." She knew what he meant. People feared what they did not understand and punished what did not match their rules. The wind picked up lightly, blowing sand against the small shelter as if trying to warn them that every choice had a cost. She looked at the Apache man and then at the baby, wondering how fate could place strangers together in such a hidden corner of the world. She did not know what path would come next, but something in her heart whispered that she was not there by accident. As the sun kept climbing, far across the open land, 3 distant figures on horseback appeared near the horizon. Moving slowly but surely in their direction, she froze. The Apache man's hand reached quietly for his small knife, though he knew it would not be enough if danger came. She pulled the baby close again, and the fire cracked softly. As if marking the start of something none of them were prepared for, the 3 riders on the horizon moved at a steady pace, the kind that did not rush but did not hesitate either. The young woman felt her heartbeat climb into her throat. She held the baby tighter and leaned slightly toward the shadowed corner of the shelter. The Apache man stood near the doorway, one hand braced on the wooden frame, the other resting near his knife. He wasn't acting brave or fearless. He was acting like a man who had run out of choices. The riders drew closer, and she could see dust rising behind their horses. The shapes of their hats and jackets told her they belonged to nearby ranch land, and not the kind that stayed quiet when they spotted something unusual. Most ranch hands feared the Apache the same way they feared night storms. Fear mixed with stories always turned into trouble. She gently rocked the baby, whispering to keep it calm. The Apache man turned just enough to look at her, his eyes holding a silent question. She nodded, letting him know she would do what she could. He stepped out of the shelter and stood in the sunlight, steady and still. He wasn't trying to hide who he was. He wasn't trying to run. He simply stood with the kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing the world. Won't go easy on you no matter how good your heart is. She stayed inside with the baby, the warmth of the fire touching her back, while tension filled the air like a trapped breath. The riders slowed as they came closer. One lifted a hand in greeting, though his smile was thin and sharp. "Heard someone was camping out here," he called. "Thought we'd take a look." The Apache man didn't answer. The riders exchanged glances. They weren't expecting conversation. They were expecting fear, or maybe anger. When they didn't see either, their eyes sharpened. One of them leaned in the saddle, trying to peer past the Apache man toward the shelter. "Thought I saw someone else in there? You got company." His tone was casual on the surface, but something underneath carried suspicion. The Apache man said nothing. He simply shifted slightly, blocking their view. Inside, the young woman held her breath. If they recognized her, rumors would spread through the ranch by sundown. If they saw the baby, even worse questions would rise. She felt the baby's fingers curl weakly around her shirt, and she closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her thoughts. She didn't want lies, but she knew some truths needed time before they could be spoken. The riders looked around at the horse tied near the shelter. The herbs scattered in a small pouch, the freshly made fire. The one in the middle scoffed. "Doesn't look like someone passing through. Looks like someone hiding." His hand hovered near his gun, not drawing it. But the meaning was clear. Before anything could escalate, a weak cry rose from inside the shelter. The baby's voice reached across the dry air. The rider's face twitched. "That a child?" he asked sharply. The Apache man didn't move. The rider frowned deeper. "That ain't yours, is it?" The young woman felt the danger shift like sudden wind. She stepped out before she could lose her nerve, holding the baby close. The riders stared at her in shock. The one with the thin smile's eyes widened. "What are you doing out here? This is Apache land. You should know better." His gaze shot back to the Apache man. "You dragging her into something?" She shook her head, keeping her voice calm. "He didn't drag me anywhere. The child needed help." Her simple words didn't calm them. Instead, suspicion grew sharper. The Apache man stepped beside her, just a little, not touching her, but standing close enough to show they were not strangers. The riders didn't like that. They whispered among themselves, throwing glances that felt as sharp as thorns. The baby whimpered, and the young woman gently rocked it, hoping the small sound wouldn't push things in the wrong direction. One rider finally spoke. "Folks at the ranch won't like this. A girl out here alone with an Apache and a baby that ain't hers?" The tone of his voice felt like a rope tightening around all of them. She didn't answer right away. Her mind raced, trying to find a path through the conflict without lying outright. She looked at the riders, then at the Apache man. She saw the fear he carried behind his stillness. Not fear for himself, fear for the child. She finally said the only thing she could. "I'm helping a sick infant. That's all. The rest is none of your concern." Her voice didn't shake, and she stood her ground. The Apache man looked at her with quiet respect, as if he hadn't expected someone to protect him without being asked. But the rider wasn't convinced. "Trouble follows this kind of thing," he muttered. "Trouble always comes when folks mix where they shouldn't." He eyed the Apache man again. "If that child belongs to your people, then your people need to take care of it, not us." He spat in the sand, then tugged the reins. but we'll be keeping our eyes open. If we hear anything strange, we come back." The riders turned their horses and moved off slowly, glancing back several times. Only when they became distant figures did she let out a shaky breath. Her knees felt weak, but she didn't sit. The Apache man stepped inside and motioned for her to follow. When she stepped in, he closed the door flap. Lowering the dim light inside, she tightened her arms around the baby and looked at him. "They could have taken me away," she whispered. "Or worse." He gave a slow nod. "I know." His voice was low. "And you still stepped out." He didn't say more, but she heard the meaning behind the words. She had done something many wouldn't dare. She sat down near the fire and checked the baby's breath. It was still weak, still slow but steady. She dipped a cloth in warm water and touched the child's forehead. The Apache man watched her with quiet amazement. "You know how to care for little ones." She shook her head gently. "I've cared for animals more than people. But life is life. Every kind tries to survive." He sat near the wall, resting his arms on his knees. The fire crackled softly, filling the small shelter with warmth that fought against the desert chill creeping into the evening. After a long silence, he spoke. "My people will not return for many days. They moved to safer ground. Many were sick. We were left behind so she could rest." He paused, voice tight. "But she left before sunrise. She asked me to keep the baby safe." The young woman felt her chest tighten. How long had he been alone with grief and fear? How long had he tried to fight everything with nothing but herbs and hope? She wanted to ask more, but he continued. "When Mother left this world," he whispered, "I tried to bury her. But before I was done, men came near. I heard horses. I could not let them see her. Not like that. So I carried the child and hid near the rocks. They left, but I could not return. The ground was taken by their tracks." She understood what he meant, even without details. He had been chased from the last place he felt safe. Now, danger was following again. She looked at the baby, then at him. "You can't stay here long," she said softly. "They'll come back." He nodded. "I know, but where will you go?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes fell to the baby. "Wherever the child can live one more day," her breath caught. She realized he wasn't thinking of himself at all. He was thinking of the baby first, and only outside. The wind roared across the land like something hungry and wild. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring or how far trouble had already spread. She didn't know if her own safety had already been traded away by stepping into his world. But she knew one thing with certainty. The world outside that shelter carried dangers they hadn't faced yet, and the riders who had left were not finished with this story. Not yet. Night settled slowly, stretching over the land like a thick blanket without warmth. Inside the small shelter, the air grew colder and heavier. The young woman kept the baby close to her chest, feeling its faint breaths like tiny feathers rising and falling. The Apache man sat by the doorway, watching the outside darkness through the small opening. As if any shadow could carry danger. The fire burned low, but neither of them dared let it die. For even a small light felt like protection. The baby let out a soft cry, not loud or strong, but enough to tell them that it was still fighting. The young woman gently dipped her fingers into warm water and traced the cloth across the child's lips, hoping it would awaken some strength. She whispered small and steady words, not grand or poetic, but filled with care. The Apache man listened from where he sat, and though he did not move closer, his heart was tied to every sound coming from the baby. He finally spoke in a low voice. "They will talk when they return. They will tell others. More will come." His words did not carry anger, only truth. She nodded, keeping her eyes on the sleeping child. "I know, but we can't run tonight. The baby is too weak." He turned his head slowly and met her eyes with understanding. "We will not run. We will wait and choose the right moment." A long silence formed between them, filled only by the wind pressing against the mud walls. She wondered how a man like him, carrying grief, fear, and responsibility with no one to guide him, could still hold himself so steady. But she also wondered what would happen when the ranch hands returned, possibly with others, ready to force answers instead of hearing them. As midnight passed, she finally asked what she had held inside since the first encounter. "What happened before you came to the creek?" He did not answer at once. His hands rested over each other, and he stared at the fire for several long breaths. "My people moved after sickness spread. The cold nights took the children first. We tried herbs, prayers, heat from stones, but the wind was stronger. When she became weak, we slowed our travel." She wanted to believe rest would bring strength, but the sickness came faster than we understood. His voice dropped. "When she felt she was close to leaving this world, she held the baby and asked me to stay behind to try and save him. She told me that even if she did not live, the child must." His words shook with a quiet ache he tried to hide. The young woman lowered her head, feeling tears she did not let fall. The weight he carried was not one she could measure with words alone. She placed her hand gently on the baby's back and whispered, "We will try." He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the desert outside. The next morning arrived without peace. Before the sun rose high, the Apache man heard something far off, something not belonging to wind or animals. He stood slowly and motioned for her to stay quiet. She lifted the baby and pressed its small body against her shoulder. Soon she heard it 2 horses, but not just 1 or 2. There were several, and they moved like men who believed they had authority on their side. Her hands trembled. "We can't stay here. They will search inside." He nodded. "We must leave without sound. Only far enough to see what they plan." He helped her place extra cloth around the baby and wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders so she wouldn't look like someone carrying a child from afar. He took a small pouch of herbs and the remaining water, then put out the fire with a gentle press of sand. They stepped out carefully, staying low behind a small hill near the shelter. Moments later, 4 riders appeared, not the same 3 from before. These men looked more serious, with rifles strapped to their saddles and eyes sharp as hawks. They circled the shelter with stern expressions. One of them rode closer and dismounted, kicking the wooden frame of the doorway. Another shouted, "Someone was here. Tracks look fresh." Their voices sounded like they weren't searching for conversation. They were searching for proof that would justify action. One of the men pointed at tracks leading toward the creek. They must have gone that way. 2 men prepared to follow the tracks. The Apache man's breath tightened. If they followed the prints, they would soon find the hiding place. He turned and guided the young woman slowly toward a line of rocks further away from where any prints would lead. He stepped carefully, covering the small tracks with his own where he could, though he knew it would not work forever. They moved until the rocks covered them completely. The baby stayed quiet as if sensing danger. She crouched behind a boulder, trembling from worry, not cold. The Apache man faced the open land, calculating every sound and shadow. The 2 riders followed tracks to the creek and paused, confused by the sharp turn mixed with the prints of animals. One of them dismounted and studied the ground. The other scanned the land with suspicion. "They're close. They wouldn't leave far with a child." The words traveled across the desert like a threat thick enough to breathe. Suddenly, the Apache man leaned closer to her and whispered, "We cannot stay like prey. We must move before they spread out." He pointed toward a distant set of rocks, farther than the ones they were hiding behind. "Once we cross those rocks, they cannot see us. There is a narrow path that leads to lower ground." She swallowed her fear. "How far?" He took a slow breath. "Far enough that your feet will hurt and mine will bleed, but close enough to try." She adjusted the baby carefully and nodded. They began moving again, step by careful step, hiding when the riders paused. The desert stretched ahead like a long, unanswered question. Every small movement they made felt like it carried a risk bigger than life itself. For hours, traveled across dry land, resting only when the baby sighed too weakly to continue. Each time they stopped, she held the infant close, praying without words. The Apache man listened to distant wind patterns, trying to judge how close the riders were. He believed they still had time, but time was not an honest friend in that land. As the sun lowered again, they found shelter between 2 tall rock walls where sand had gathered like a small nest. She sat down slowly, exhausted, pulling the baby close. The Apache man knelt and checked the baby's breathing with the back of his hand. He looked at her with worry. The child needs something more than herbs and water. We need help from someone who knows how to heal. She nodded slowly. There is one person at the ranch who knows how to care for weak children and sick babies. But she is afraid of your people because others made her believe lies. His gaze stayed steady on her. Will she help, if you ask? She hesitated. I don't know, but she won't slam a door in my face. She has a heart. He thought for a long moment. Then his voice deepened with the weight of a father's decision. If there is a chance, even a small one, you must try. She stared at him, realizing what he meant. You want me to go alone? He nodded once. They will question me if they see me. They might take the baby, but if you go alone, they will listen first, not shoot first. Her heart raced. If I go and they follow me back, they might hurt you. He shook his head. You will not lead them. You will lie if needed. You will survive and come back only when you know it is safe. She stared at him, torn between fear and purpose. He leaned forward slightly and spoke with quiet strength. You are not trapped. You are chosen by the moment. Not by me. Not by fate. But by the child who trusted your arms. She looked down at the baby, felt its faint breath, and knew there was no turning back. She stood, placed her hand on the Apache man's shoulder, and whispered, I will return. His eyes softened. He gave her a single nod that carried more meaning than any promise spoken aloud. She walked toward the fading light, heart pounding, leaving the Apache man and the baby hidden among the rocks as night prepared to fall once again. Not knowing who would meet her on the ranch road or what the riders might discover. While she was gone, she walked through the cooling air with a steady but unsure pace. Every step toward the ranch felt like walking into questions without answers. She did not know how much time the baby had, nor how long the Apache man could stay hidden without food or heat. The desert evening felt longer than any night she had known before. She could not shake the fear that every moment she spent away from them was a moment the child struggled alone. Even though she trusted he would protect the baby until his own strength faded. By the time the lantern lights of the ranch house came into view, her legs felt heavy and her throat was dry. She stopped for a moment under a cottonwood tree near the fence line, trying to catch her breath and steady her heart before going inside. If she walked in with panic, no one would listen. She needed calm, even if calm was the last thing she felt. She went around the back door quietly, hoping to find the older woman she trusted most. The kitchen door was half open, the warm smell of soup drifting out into the night. She stepped in and found the woman near the stove, stirring the pot as if the world had no problems outside those walls. The woman turned when she heard footsteps and looked surprised. You're back late, she said gently. Something wrong? The young woman hesitated, then spoke with as much truth as she dared. There's a baby out near the hills. A sick one. Needs help now. The older woman paused, studying her face, trying to decide if fear or truth sat behind her eyes. Whose child is it? The young woman lowered her gaze. An Apache mother who passed. The father is with the child, but they need help. She watched carefully for anger, fear, refusal. Anything that would close the door before it truly opened. The older woman did not answer right away. She looked into the pot, then to the window where darkness rested just beyond the frame. After a long, slow breath, she said, A baby is still a baby. Doesn't matter where it came from. She pulled out a cloth bag and began packing small items, herbs, warm cloth, and a small bottle she rarely used. She handed a shawl to the young woman and nodded. Lead me? They both slipped out quietly, not waking anyone. No one asked questions when no one saw them leave. They walked across the land under the moonlight, moving quickly, but not carelessly. The older woman did not complain or speak fearfully. She simply walked as though helping was the most natural thing a person could choose. When they reached the rocky path, the young woman signaled for quiet and guided her slowly through the narrow path where the Apache man and baby were hidden. When they arrived, the Apache man stood immediately, ready to defend, but stopped when he saw who she brought. His eyes held caution, but not rejection. She stepped forward and said, "She is here to help the baby. Please trust her." He looked at the older woman, then slowly lowered himself to sit near the child. The older woman knelt, opening her small bag. She touched the baby's forehead, listened to its slow breathing, and checked for warmth. Her eyes softened with sadness, but she did not move away. She mixed warm herbs with the water, brushing it gently across the baby's lips. She handed the young woman a cloth. "Hold him close. Your warmth helps more than you know." The night stretched with quiet voices and slow care. The older woman worked carefully, offering tiny drops of moisture, massaging the baby's hands and feet to keep the blood moving, whispering soft encouragement that seemed to float through the rocks. After what felt like hours, the baby's breathing steadied slightly, and its fingers curled with a little more strength. Not fully saved, but stronger than before. The Apache man looked at the older woman. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded gently. A child's life is worth every mile walked. He lowered his head, touched by a kindness he had not seen from outsiders in many seasons. They stayed through the night, taking turns resting, but never letting the fire go out or the child grow cold. Morning light finally touched the edge of the rocks, and the baby opened its eyes wider than before, letting out a small but clear sound that felt like the first true hope since they met. The young woman smiled with relief, tears forming without shame. The Apache man stared at the infant, as if seeing a new world opening. The older woman nodded, knowing there was still recovery ahead, but also knowing the hardest part had been fought and won. "We should not stay here long," she said as she packed her things. "The riders will search again. We must move somewhere safer." The Apache man agreed. "My people will return in 2 days. There is a place near the river where I can wait. They will find me there." The young woman asked, "Will the baby be safe until then?" The healer nodded slowly. With rest, warmth, and care, yes. They began the journey before the sun rose high. The older woman led them to a hidden path used long ago by traders. The young woman held the baby close, now feeling its small movements, tiny signs of strength building. The Apache man walked beside them quietly, guiding them through places few outsiders knew. By late afternoon, they reached the river area, where thick trees and stones offered natural shelter. The Apache man built a new small fire, and the young woman placed the baby near her chest again, humming a soft tune she remembered from childhood, though she didn't know where she first heard it. The older woman prepared to leave, but before she did, she placed her hand on the Apache man's shoulder. "The world out there is loud," she said, "but keep your heart quiet." He nodded. She turned to the young woman and smiled with pride. "You did something many people would not dare. That matters." Then she left, walking back the way they had come, knowing her part of the story was complete as the day faded. The Apache man and young woman sat near the river, taking turns watching the baby sleep peacefully. They spoke quietly about loss, fear, and belonging. The young woman told him she felt she finally understood why she had always looked toward the hills, as if something waited for her. He listened with calm understanding, telling her that some hearts hear things others cannot. 2 days later, faint drum signals echoed through the trees. The Apache man stood, eyes sharp yet peaceful. "My people are near." The young woman held the baby close one last time, smiling as she felt its strong, tiny breaths. She handed the baby gently to the Apache man, who accepted with both hands, as if holding something sacred. His people arrived with cautious steps, but when they saw the baby alive in his arms and the young woman standing with calm respect, they lowered their guard. A wise elder approached and touched the baby's cheek. "He has survived. The mother's spirit walks with him." The Apache man looked at the young woman. "You saved him." "Not alone," she answered softly, "but I am glad I was there." He nodded with gratitude that reached deeper than words. "If ever you need a place where you are not judged," he said, "you may come to us." She smiled. "And if you ever need help again, you know where the ranch sits." As she began walking back toward her world, she looked over her shoulder. The Apache man stood with the baby, surrounded by his people, safe and no longer alone. She carried no regret, only a warm understanding that life had placed her in the right path at the right moment. She whispered to herself that sometimes the greatest journeys are not taken with saddles or wagons, but with courage carried quietly in the heart. The land behind her felt different now, no longer empty or lonely. It held a story of compassion, trust, and hope. She walked with lighter steps, knowing she helped protect life in a world where it could have easily been ignored. And somewhere behind her, near the river, a child slept safely, held by a father whose heart finally found peace again. That was enough to call it a happy ending.